how do you think about, and with your experience in like other complicated buildings, what's unique? Did anyone just get that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started typing on something else.
That's got to stay in.
That's staying. That is staying in. I thought I said something.
No,
I bet he's sweating.
No one's going to know that happened.
I think we'll have to play buzzword bingo or something.
I'm just going to pick up from where I was, so you can't edit around it. It has to stay in. So, with your experience with.
You're listening to the Offsite Podcast with Jason and Carlos, where we talk all things construction and technology.
Join us for discussions with industry leaders and insights into the latest trends in construction.
Welcome back to the Offsite Podcast. So today we're going to dive into a topic that we've had on the docket for a while: data centers. So it's a enormous area of growth. It's reshaping, I guess, the global economy. Just some background and stats from some research around by 2027, global data center capex is on track to reach about 400 billion. The demand for data center power, so the consequential infrastructure, is expected to drive around 50 billion of capex in just US power generation alone. And there's an expectation from this year, 2024, through to 2027. So over that period, an increase in capex across transmission, distribution, generation of about 38% globally. That's all been driven by the demand for data centers, which some element of that is this AI boom that's happening around the world. Within that, Asia is emerging as a key region for data center growth. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, India are heavily investing in infrastructure for data centers. For instance, Malaysia is attracting a ton of investment with initiatives like Greater Kuala Lumpur. Data center construction is unique. It brings its own set of challenges, techniques that differ from traditional infrastructure or building projects. There's specific climate systems, there's power requirements and redundancy, and security as well as a major concern for data centers. And so for folks that don't interact with this every day, these data centers, specifically what would be called like a hyperscale data center, the kind operated by Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, Microsoft, power a massive chunk of the internet that we use every day. And those folks account for about 2/3 of all data center investment. And so today what we wanted to do is dive into a discussion around what makes data center construction distinct, what techniques might make sense from other projects, and what might not work as effectively. And so joining today is Carlos, so two people that have never delivered a data center. So I thought we'd do a podcast where we guess about how they're delivered. No, we're not. Also joining us is Sean Hubert. Sean is the head of planning for Asia at Lendlease. Sean, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us.
No problems. All good.
The couple of things, Carlos, about Sean that are unique and distinct. First of all, he's about the same age as you and I, which makes me, as I'm sitting at home in a sweater that I've been wearing all day, think, what have I done with the last 15 years of my life? More importantly, Sean is a construction engineer in disguise with his background in a similar role as myself, which makes him, and I guess prefacing this with no offense to all the great planners that I work with daily, an extremely practical planning manager, head of planner.
It was quite an old episode. I said all the best planners were engineers first, and I actually got an email off the back of that of someone like, "Hey, I've been a planner my whole life, blah blah blah." And I find it quite offensive that you've just suggested I'm no good because I wasn't an engineer. So I promised myself I wouldn't say
now's
that
the time.
again.
Now's the time for that. Now's the time for that bleeping technique that Ollie was just telling us about.
Yeah.
Name and shame. No, I think all the best QSs used to be engineers as well. Is that true?
No. Sean, bit of context. I'm a QS, and Jason likes to I think he questions the existence of them at times, because in Australia, the engineer obviously does everything. They sort of do the engineering as well as the commercial. But yeah, we'll push that argument to the side.
Engineers are jacks of all trades out
Master
of
of
Australia,
none.
including planning. And I've got to say, there's an interesting boundary between expectations of engineers in the planning space. But I've got some pretty strong held views about planning ownership and program ownership. But we can delve into
That's 100%. That's 100% on the docket.
Yeah.
So maybe to like start out in this data center conversation, Sean, with your experience in Asia, it being an area where there's a lot of data center development, I've seen project awards to Leighton Asia, Lendlease are building at least one that I'm aware of. How do you think about, and with your experience in like other complicated buildings, is there anything specifically about data centers that jumps out that makes them uniquely complicated?
Yeah, there's a big part for me, which is about sort of distance of integration in different jobs. And by that, I mean sort of closeness of sort of follow-on trades, but also timing of deliveries and lead times and those sorts of things. And data centers are one which are typically, low rise. So there's really not a huge amount of time between structures, launching and running off, and then having to follow in with subsequent trades. So I'd actually consider data centers sort of one of the most compressed kind of planning efforts, which requires so much coordination and engagement, more so than some other jobs which have a little bit more time available to sort of consider different disciplines of work as the project evolves. So they're fast-paced. As I said, they're very, very coordinated and integrated. And you mentioned a few sort of, I suppose, topics or niches around data centers, around cooling systems, around security, even around sort of power generation and incoming infrastructure into the plots and centers. That all makes them a really fast-paced job.
And in terms of the delivery model, is it common to sub everything or sub a majority? I'm assuming there's a lot of specialized elements in there.
I reckon it's horses for courses for where you're operating, just depending on sort of supply chain capacity and also quality and capability. A good example is a data center sort of recently built in Japan. Was managed through a general contractor, but they did go through to all subcontractors for different disciplines. It was a structural steel structure, which certainly allowed a lot of a sort of fast-paced and modular style approach. But then, in a country like Malaysia, we're actually building a data center that will be in situ. So, reinforced concrete in situ, no precast components, and still trying to achieve, large span, column-free data halls. So it really does come down to, local capability. And at the end of the day, providers like a Leighton's or a Lendlease are able to operate in accordance with that local capability and try and get the best outcome possible at the end of the day.
In terms of the example there of in situ, presumably defense against natural disasters and things like that for data centers is super important. Does that differ how you would build like a typical concrete kind of warehouse structure? Is it fundamentally different or is it quite similar?
Yeah. Look, I think it's, again, it's sort of situational. So you do your risk-based assessment on the plot of land at which you're actually, proposing to build a data center. So, anything in Japan has to be designed with seismic considerations. So certainly the center going up there had really significant seismic isolation devices, a lot of dampers going into it. But I'd say it's actually more so the plot that takes priority in terms of assessing whether it's suitable for a data center. That is, proximity to power is a key piece, and it's going to be fascinating to see how that unfolds over the course of the next few years, particularly given people's different sort of emissions targets and how data centers will play into that. Because if everyone is trying to go green, can they actually then also support their surge in data center demand, particularly this new AI sort of construct of data centers? But coming back to sort of natural disasters, it's one of the first and highest level sort of risk assessments played over a particular site. Flood risks and another good example is having to build up the site, where we currently are in Malaysia, in order to help prevent against, 1 in 100 year sort of events. So it does come into the sort of foundation of the entire longevity and sustainability of a particular site.
You touched on obviously the amount of energy that's actually used to run these data centers from the consumption point of view. and sustainability. I had a thought this morning. There's probably some scientific reason why this is just not possible.
Olu,
but
get your shower thought sound effect alert going.
yeah. They obviously produce a lot of heat,
Postulating.
and there's like quite substantial cooling systems. Do any of them use that heat to generate energy?
Yeah, and can they recycle in some way? Not that I'm aware of. Only because I think it's so outside of core operation, which is just keeping those servers running at an efficient capacity. But I mean, I like simplifying complex things, and for me, a data center is just a big fridge with a heap of batteries and making sure there's extra power supply. Yeah, exactly. In case it's the cold room of the Tesco's. Yeah, it's just got a lot of computers in it. If you do start breaking down your power bill at home, the fridge is one of the biggest consumers all the time. So data centers are right up there. And then playing into long-term sustainability and as I said, different governments' initiatives to try and reduce emissions and ensure they have clean generation of energy. To that effect, Singapore's put a moratorium on the construction of any new data centers for a period of time because it has such an impact on their power consumption.
Do you get a lot of public interventions, I guess is the right way of stating it? I can imagine in the UK people up in arms around energy consumption and things like that, but I guess you don't see it on the news, so it's probably not a thing.
I think it's going to be pretty well, not necessarily hidden, but I know that data center operators will go to pretty far lengths just to make sure that they can demonstrate that they are sustaining, or so they are sourcing sustainable power in order to support their data centers, because there isn't going to be an industry, I think, like it and a power demand from it certainly evolving in the next decade. So as I said, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of them are net zero anyway, so they must be.
It's even in their own interest. Like it's not even good, I guess, in relation to the environmental targets. But if you know that you are data center 5 out of another 20 that are going to be built, there's a risk that the incremental data centers put your power supply at risk as they more and more come online. And so it makes business sense to make sure that you've got that on lock. For sure.
I mean, I think it's already straining some local infrastructure. So there are waits on power to sites of up to 5 to 6 years. So there's a huge impact on, as I said, sort of local infrastructure to actually try and activate sites for use as data centers, which means, the sites that do have power are absolute hot property.
Sorry,
I'm going to drag this back to project delivery, because Carlos, we're stuck on Carlos's warm shower thought, where I was thinking like, I wonder if data centers generate a lot of heat. So if I put my engineer construction hat on, and you were talking about like you've got this big footprint where lots of trades can get in like simultaneously almost. I'm interested to understand the dynamics of the typical specialist trades and contractors that would come on. If I put this politely, I guess, how sometimes you have subcontractor trades that kind of turn up on site, kind of like they're like a character in like a first-person shooter, just kind of like, I'm ready and waiting, tell me what to do, sort of like, I'm ready, boss, what do we want to do? And then other trades, they kind of like, they've got their own plan, they've got a mission, they're in and out. You just have to like give them a space and give them 4 days, then an escalator goes in, for example. What are the what is the dynamic of the typical trades on like the data center fit out?
I think sort of as I mentioned before, it's uber coordinated, and they have to be, because the space that's sort of available, interstitial space for all of the services, and particularly with the sort of volume of cooling services and HVAC pipes, and then on top of that, all of your network cabling and power cabling, it is one of the most dense kind of configurations that I've ever come across. And so the only way to actually effectively fit out a data center is with this uber level of coordination. But you will still typically have separate contractors, delivering each of their scopes. So it really does require a very, very firm grip on coordination. Otherwise, it will end in tears. I'm not going to suggest that it's any different to most kind of building types when it comes to a fit out approach. It's just that it needs to be so much more well oiled and a much better understanding of, let's say, a flow of work and available space amongst trades, such that it can be done within any kind of realms of a program or timescale.
And so I'd imagine there's a lot of design coordination that happens because of that type of, and then when it comes to actually like sequential execution of the work coordination, where do you see a lot of that happening? Is it solving a lot of that at the master schedule planning level, or does where does a lot of that sit?
Honestly, I would actually prefer to see it on the ground on a routine basis. I'm a huge advocate for, I think it was a Dwight D. Eisenhower quote, that plans are useless, but planning is essential. And that's a bit of a mantra that I sort of operate by.
Carlos has got that tattooed on. Is that it's on the left buttocks?
Yeah. It's so real, and it still applies so much today. And it's great to have a piece of paper which captures your thoughts, but actually it's the process of having discussed those thoughts and certainly making sure there's a breadth of understanding of sequence of resource requirement of, area across teams. That is important. That's what's, critical to actually the planning effort in my mind. And that all comes back to communication and the quality of communication. So the essence of good planning is good, communication. And this is where I think often planners actually hold the key, is because 9 times out of 10, highly technical people aren't necessarily the best communicators, and they do have quite a narrow lens about what they're there to do, as you sort of mentioned. So to be able to break down, competing interests and be able to stitch a series of, different personnel together who have different drivers to achieve a pretty succinct outcome is where, a planner can add huge amounts of value. So when in the concept or in the construct of a data center, they become very, very important to help achieve a good outcome at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think if I reflect on what you're saying, you've got the situation where you've got a large footprint of where you could work, which means where you do work is probably a lot of resource-driven constraints, if we were to talk planning language. In my view, I don't know whether this is a correct statement, but that lends itself, if you try to do that too much in advance, you can very easily get into the state of over-planning something, because when you get it on the ground and the facts are different.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely. Plans are only as good, as the day that you've drawn them up, because the next day, for a Mike Tyson quote, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So, and that happens on a daily on construction sites. That's exactly why there's a discipline associated with planning to help resolve all of those issues. It's definitely not sort of at a master plan level. Yes, high level sequence and concept of sequence of trades, but when it gets down to the nitty gritty, it's got to be a level of hardcore on-site planning and, to an extent, production control. Binary outcomes of yes or no, did you or did not achieve what you're meant to do today, in order to then evolve the plan for the next few days ahead.
Yeah. So there's those types of projects where they're probably they benefit from a lot of thought at that master schedule planning level, or they're led in that way, where you've got this floor needs to be cured before we can drop the false work here, when this needs to be post tension before we can go there. And there's this very logical sequence. And then there's these other ones where it sounds like data centers and, earthworks jobs are traditionally supervisor on the ground, reading the lay of the land and what's happening and going this here, then that there.
Yeah. Look, don't get me wrong that, obviously data centers, as you say, are a significant sort of area of real estate where you can allow trades, to get quite a nice flow and sequence like you've kind of described. But as I said, it can be pretty quickly interrupted, by any kind of impact or delay by one or the other. And so that's where you need to be somewhat agile, such that you can continue, a level of progress without, sticking to that very routine or regimented kind of flow. As much as we might be alluding to sort of the fit out of whether it's data halls or, major corridors, there's a lot of external infrastructure as well that needs to sort of go in, whether it's, chiller units on a roof or, emergency generators on the outside. there's plenty that sort of all has to happen concurrently to some extent. And so that's also why I sort of place quite a lot of emphasis on planning versus a master plan, given the kind of dynamic nature of what can happen on a job.
To ask potentially my first dumb question, is it right to assume that
Short
this-
it down.
the involvement of the planning team, like right at the coalface on the day-to-day, is that achievable because there's not a huge amount of client-driven change from the top, which often sort of soaks up the time of planners because the scope is like the scope, and it's not like a civils job where you could be shifting it around quite often. So you're like laser focused on, we know the sequence, we need to coordinate the delivery.
Well, often depends how far you're in the camp, right? So there'll be a lot of operators who will ask you, they'll give you a partial scope in essence. You might have to install your false floor and your cooling systems, but actually they're going to come in to install all of their own security systems. They're going to put their servers in and sort of connect them all up, because there are, as was mentioned quite earlier, very stringent security protocols around certainly the operationalization. Is that even a word? Operationalization, one of those ones, of data centers. So it's sort of dependent on how far one scope extends. But when it comes down to the planner's role sort of on the coalface, this is where I've got pretty strong views, whereby the planner's not the person who's directing the troops on the ground. That's your engineer or package manager. But the planner's role is to ask the right questions of those package managers or engineers to ensure that their scope is coordinated and planned effectively, in a collaborative approach. Yeah, that's where, I'll certainly draw a line and say, all right, well, on that, daily or weekly basis, it's going to be the people who are putting the troops to work that actually author and own the plan. And then it is the planner's responsibility to help ensure that broadly that's understood and coordinated, and also ties into a primary critical path or a broad scale sequence or broader scale sequence as captured by a master program. So very much grease on the wheel, very much not there to have the right answers, but to ask the right questions and to keep that slightly broader lens of oversight across time, particularly forward-looking time.
Yeah, it's like if the planner has to do the planning for people or make people plan, you're in trouble.
You're in strife.
Sorry, Carlos.
No, yeah, I was going to say, and obviously planners have gone through the rigor of building the original schedule anyway. So trying to pass down like assumptions and knowledge to the team that you've already been through the logic of thinking about. Yeah, in that way makes a lot of sense. Sorry, Jason.
No, I was just gonna. I just have this giggle occasionally, Sean, where as part of like whenever we supply software to a construction contractor, we go through this vendor assessment process oftentimes, and they'll always ask you, where's your data hosted? What's the physical security of the data center? And then we'll say, whatever it is, Google Cloud Data Center, and it's this one here, and here are their security controls. And they're usually the contractor building the data center that's putting the physics. It's like a full circle.
What are your security credentials? Yeah.
Does the cloud vendor use trusted contractors to build their data center? Yeah, they use.
Yeah. So look, it's a fascinating world, and there are such different and emerging technologies even inside the sort of sector itself. So whether it's fully immersive cooling systems, so they actually sink all servers into great big pools of water or coolant. There's some really interesting stuff emerging.
Wow.
It's going to be such an interesting space to watch from a land perspective, from a power perspective, from that power supply and sustainability of that power, and then also from, and we haven't even sort of touched on it, but from the speed of development of these different buildings, because there are certainly regions, I suppose, that can actually support quite a modular-based approach. But let's also keep in mind this pretty large-scale stuff. So we're talking, as I said, sort of 20-meter column-free spans for good-sized data halls. So there's some very large-scale modularization requirements, which maybe lends itself to actually sort of an on-site fabrication yard or something like that. But yeah, it's a very popular space. It's the flavor of the month. But I'm certainly hoping to get stuck into a few more data centers over our time.
Just to double click on something Carlos said, to clarify for my own interest, Carlos was talking about the idea that maybe or maybe not, during the construction, it would be subject to the kind of change and variation that can happen on some infrastructure jobs where you have like government stakeholders or architects, or that are always changing things as you go. Is it a fair assumption that they're pretty fixed requirements and it's just get in and get out as quickly as possible, or is it like other infrastructure jobs that things change as you go along?
No, look, they are still very susceptible to change. Like change sucks, right? We absolutely hate change. From the construction, if there's the one kind of thing that really
QSs do love it, though. So you are talking to Carlos.
QSs bathe in change, That's their jam. But for planners, couldn't be worse. But certainly, just as we've had this sort of surge of AI, there have been data centers that are 90% complete and they've gone for a full refit out so that they can service an AI approach.
Right. Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, it's just following where the money flows. And a lot of these providers, are sufficiently cashed up that they can just go and do a full refit. So the only thing that's really driving their intent is schedule, is program. They've got to get it operationalized. There you go. That's the one, as quick as possible.
Yeah. I was thinking through, like, there's obviously, I can't remember the numbers, something like 60 billion a year at the moment on data centers.
Yeah.
Like design life, ignore the concrete, the technology inside it. Surely it's changing pretty rapidly. And you just said there with AI.
Rapidly.
So are they, do they actually future-proof it in a way that they can like replace modular units within the structure, or is it?
Yeah, well, this is where there's a bit of a theme of sort of shell and core dynamic. So actually, contractors will only be brought in to build a shell and core, and then it comes down to the operator to fit it out as they sort of see fit. And subsequently, they can also retrofit it. But also there is a natural limitation on the power supply that's coming to a site. So 9 times out of 10, any configuration that goes into a data center will maximize the power supply that, comes to the site, both from a, cooling perspective and also from density IT racks. So there's a bit of a limitation there anyway. So up until that power gets upgraded, which, is a very long time coming, they generally have to operate with the fit out that's in play up until server technology becomes more efficient, or they can achieve a higher density.
Well, they can just take power straight off the heat that's being generated.
Yeah, maybe they can reset.
Carlos a shower.
It's a Nobel Peace Prize incoming, I think.
There's an industry niche there. Maybe you can explore it.
With 2 or so minutes left, this question we may keep or delete. Asking for a friend, Sean. Is Lendlease better now that the engineering division's over at Acciona?
I love to have in-house smarts. I love to have people to talk to because, that's our game. No one person has all the experience in the world to be able to, put a program together. So I feel that, we might have lost a little bit, but also if we don't have to take design responsibility, then that's a good thing too. So
it was the whole like infrastructure. That whole division was.
Look, I was born out of a bit of an infrastructure base, so I do miss it. I miss the railway. I was doing sort of a lot of railway work, possession work early on, and that was great old fun. I think Lendlease is firmly set in a good old developers camp now, so we'll see how it expands.
Awesome. We're gonna run out of time, mate. So first of all, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been a ton of fun, and I've learned a lot about data centers and Carlos's showers. And so only thing to add is now that Carlos and I are both fathers, we're taking this podcast increasingly seriously. So for listeners that do send us feedback, that send Carlos emails complaining about what he says, it's really useful. It does help us shape what we discuss and how we discuss it. So please, we do welcome and thank you for doing that. And please keep an eye out for a listener survey. It's going to be coming out in the near future. Sean, Carlos, thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Chase.
Good on you guys. Thanks for having me.